Hi, I hope everyone enjoyed tonight's feature, Tokyo Hula. My name is Michael Robinson. I am the Associate Creative Director for the Houston Cinema Art Society. I'm honored to be moderating tonight's Q&A, and it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's guest, calling from Hawaii, Director Lisette Flanary.
Aloha, hi Michael.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. Sorry, I really just want to congratulate you on the film. It was just fantastic and something I had really no reference point for, and just the film did a brilliant job of really welcoming so much about both about hula, but also about this kind of cross-cultural understanding of what hula is, and whether that be agreements or maybe strains or branching out points. I think it was a really well-told film, so just congratulations.
Oh, mahalo for that. Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be sharing it at HAAPIFEST this year.
Absolutely. I just wanted to get started and just ask, kind of where did your interest in the story of cultural exchange for hula stem from?
Well, in particular, I've done other films about hula on the continent in the United States, in California, for Native Hawaiians who have moved away from Hawaii, but use hula as a way to kind of create community and connect back to home. But I was very curious, about other cultures that were studying and practicing and learning hula that didn't have that kind of connection or tie to Hawaiian culture or even to Hawaii per se. So, hula definitely is global in the way that many art forms and cultural traditions have kind of gone global these days. It's in Europe, it's in Mexico, but in Japan, just the sheer numbers are really sort of what interested me from the get-go. I've kind of watched the numbers kind of keep climbing over the years. There's definitely been waves of interest in hula in Japan, going all the way back to post-World War II, when Hawaiian music came to Japan. And then in the 80s, when there was a lot of tourism between Japan and Hawaii, there was a big economic bubble that burst, but hula was something that became a mainstay in Japan. And many of our kumahula or our master hula teachers have been going back and forth and teaching over these many decades. But now, if there are 2 million people dancing hula in Japan, that's more than there are just people, period, here in Hawaii. So I was very curious, what happens when you are so removed from the place of origin, and what are the ways that hula is translated and taught in this very different foreign culture. And having seen hula dancers perform here that are from Japan, that definitely sparked my interest. I was really sort of I think one of the very first times I saw a very large group, a very large halau from Japan perform was at the Merry Monarch Hula competition. They have a ho'ike night, or a show, where they invite people from all over the world to come and perform. And there was a group from Japan that was just like an army of people on stage, and they were so technically perfect. It was kind of almost mind-blowing. And I was like, even though it's perfect technically, I feel like there's still something sort of missing. I'm curious, how are they being taught, and what's really kind of going on? And we all know that there's a lot of people dancing in Japan. We all know that our kumu, our masters and our musicians are back and forth, pre-pandemic, of course, a lot. And, we don't really have a dialogue about it. How do we feel about this? And, there's been little issues that have cropped up here and there. But I really wanted to do a doc on this because I thought it'd be a great place to kind of open up a dialogue about this whole concept of hula as it is being continued and perpetuated around the world, around the globe.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is such a great work to really balance that. I think, it really acts almost as a case study, I feel like, of, you're getting such an interesting vantage point into how hula is being understood, both from the dancer's perspective, but also from people who've only understood it as being located in Japan. And I really am interested as, from your experience as a hula dancer, how did that kind of shape the way that you wanted to tell the story?
Well, this is the third film in a trilogy of films about hula and Hawaiian culture. And I feel that, my journey as a dancer and through my own hula studies, it definitely informs my work as a director and producer of documentary. That question that I sort of was in particular very inspired to sort of ask everyone in Japan was, what is it that draws you to the hula? Why do you love hula so much? Is something that, I know I have answered that for myself, but I was curious, what many folks in Japan thought. And what was so strange was and this is over a very large period of time, was a lot of people were like, gosh, I don't know. And when I asked a lot of the hula masters who'd been teaching there and really kind of, I think, had all that experience there, they were like, gosh, I don't know. When you find the answer, can you let me know? And it is such a good question. But I think that, for me, I feel like a lot of the reasons why the Japanese love hula are for many of the same reasons that I love hula, right? The sense of community, a place where you're able to express emotions. And, in Japan, there's not a lot of room in everyday society to express like that, and definitely they're finding this really powerful connection to culture and to other people, I think, through dancing hula. There were things that I discovered along the way that surprised me. Like, I didn't realize how difficult it was to smile, for instance. And we shot that workshop where people were really, really working very, very hard to get the perfect hula smile. And I was like, wow, that's something that as a dancer, I just take for granted, right? That a smile is something that's so natural and easy, but culturally, it's something that they really have to be very conscious of and really think about. I don't think you need to break it down and exercise your face and really, really work that industriously at it. But, they're very much aware of the challenges and the differences in their studies of hula in Japan.
No, I really loved that sequence. It was so interesting to even hear that one woman talking about how she was so focused on the movement that she couldn't even think back to how she's being viewed, and having to really kind of think about what are those kind of innate components that you have to make up for, and what do you have to how do you basically kind of break down those barriers and get to understand these digestible bits that I think aren't maybe necessarily are needed to be taught in maybe their indigenous settings. I want to also ask a little bit about Spa Resort Hawaiians, because that was one of the most fascinating parts, and just such an interesting weird setting. So the owner had mentioned that they're kind of creating Japan's Hawaii, and you follow it by a really amazing soundbite, that's not critiquing their technique necessarily, but saying that it doesn't have basically that kind of what you're talking about, that soul. It's technically perfect, but not it doesn't maybe have all of the components there. Do you think that this generates positive interest in Hawaiian culture, and for people who see this and can be like, oh no, I am interested in this, let me learn more? Or do you think it gives this false sense of authenticity that people feel like they've experienced Hawaii, even though if it's only Japan's Hawaii, and then they mix the two and don't realize that one is a copy?
Right. I mean, I feel sort of similarly about Spa Resort Hawaiians as I might, maybe in going to a big Polynesian review or a luau show. Although I think that even those here have gotten really quite good at distinguishing between entertainment and then, maybe something that is more culturally more traditional, or, the Spa Resort Hawaiians, that was a place that I had heard about. I had even seen featured in a narrative feature called Hula Girls. And I was so curious. I had to go there and see it for myself. It actually, the history of that place is so interesting because it's literally it was a coal mining town And when the coal mines closed, they were like, what are we going to do? How can we save the town? You know, and they had this bright idea to start a Polynesian review and resort and hot spring for tourism instead. So coal mining went to tourism. They built this place that's been around since 1964. And around that time, you know, things in Japan also really shifted, right? Up until 1964, when they had Tokyo Olympics, the government was very restrictive about people traveling outside of Japan. So you really had to be working in government or business or on a sports team to actually leave Japan for travel. And that all changed in 1964. So the place where everyone in Japan really wanted to go was Hawaii, right? That was their dream destination. It was sort of a mythical place. And so it doesn't surprise me that this coal mining town, when they were conceptualizing the place of Spa Resort Hawaiians, that they were like, you know, we should make it like Hawaii. That'll really, like, people will come here to relax and enjoy and feel like they visited Hawaii without really leaving Japan. But they were also very clear that, you know, we're doing a hula show that's for the Japanese, by the Japanese. They said that many times. And I was like, well, what does that look like? Because they're not trying to say like, we're doing hula as it is, you know, a cultural art form from Hawaii. They're like, we're just kind of doing our own version of it. Right. So it's, again, from that, like, it's from a different time period almost. And I was curious to see if that was still true today or if it had changed at all. You know, I think some of the original dancers were a lot of the coal miners' daughters who had like auditioned and danced there. They also studied flamenco and tea ceremony. I mean, there was like a lot of other kind of interesting aspects to that show. But it's still very much like a entertainment review. You know, I mean, as you saw in the film, there's like, it's like a water park too. So there's like water slides and a hula show and then hot springs and some restaurants. So it was really sort of interesting, but I think they really wanted to articulate to me that like, hey, we're not trying to do, you know, hula from Hawaii. We're sort of doing our own version of it, which was a little sort of conceptually strange. But I think that the people who go there are really just sort of maybe in the way that people might go to Vegas and sort of like, oh, I'm going to go to the Paris hotel and feel like I'm in Paris in Las Vegas. You know, I feel like it's sort of similar in a lot of ways.
No, absolutely. I think that's really fascinating, especially dealing. I think when there's that distinct sense of like where this is not trying to be something else, but then how much does the viewer pick up on versus, you know, how much of the authorship is really getting carried through. It's always intriguing to figure out kind of where those lines are drawn in that sense. Given that you know, the film ends with saying that these competitions are happening all around the world, is this kind of like a microcosm of what's happening in all these other locations, or is it a different relationship, I guess, with hula in Japan, where, you know, just because there is so much, I would guess say, you know, kind of so much interest, you know, with you're saying the 2 million dancers in Japan alone.
Yeah, I mean, there are hula competitions in Europe, but they're much smaller. There are some, I think, even in Mexico. But I would say Japan is, you know, for every hula competition we have here in Hawaii, there is a sister competition in Japan. So it is definitely the place where we have the most connections. And that is true for like the number of kumu who also have schools in Japan. You know, they'll have, you know, their halal here in Hawaii, but then they'll also have a few different satellite halal in Japan. And everyone sort of is organized a little bit differently. Some sensei in Japan kind of, you know, hook up with a Hawaiian kumu, and they're like affiliated with that kumu. And then others from here, and especially now I'm seeing more and more, you know, they really are spending like half the year there.
Wow.
And, you know, very much like dual residency, they're paying taxes there. It is a big part of, you know, how they're able to make a living and continue to even perpetuate hula here in Hawaii, right? It's more lucrative to go and teach in Japan. So that's why, you know, I think that it's not really so much the microcosm. It's like, this to me is really sort of like, this is the biggest and probably the most, you know, the fact that we have so many, you know, dancers and teachers and musicians kind of connected to folks over there that are involved in hula, is very different than, let's say, you know, groups in maybe, you know, Europe or Mexico or in other places in the world. I think it's on a much smaller scale. But as we know, as you know, the pandemic has really taught us, we're even more connected online now. So I'm really curious, like, how much of this has gone on Zoom? You know, like, is it, you know, maybe they've got more students now because it was accessible through online resources, which I think previously, you know, hula online is not something that was done, but I think because of the pandemic, a lot of people said, well, you know what, we're going to have to try this and see how it works. So it'll be interesting. I'm curious to see if there's even more sort of, you know, even more interaction between Hawaii and Japan when it comes to hula. Absolutely.
No, that's really fascinating, especially in that context of the woman who had to travel 8 hours to take classes, you know, and that's
right.
An investment, you know, and when that barrier of entry gets lowered and those are, you know, things become more accessible. But then also, you know, that does raise the question of how much can, you know, be transferred through, you know, through online. Like, obviously this is possible through online, but what's lost and what do people think that they're getting that maybe they're not, especially the disconnect between what can be taught and what can be seen as being like, oh, you're actually getting it, much what you're talking about with the not having maybe the, I guess, the spirit of, you know, not having the heart, not knowing, you know, how to really feel.
Right.
To the hula. What were some of the challenges that you had making the film? I mean, obviously you had to, I'm assuming, fly, you know, to Japan and need to find all these new resources. I was really amazed just to note like how well connected you were able to be. I feel like there were so many points of access and it seemed so seamless from how you transitioned from context in Hawaii to into Japan to seeing all these different iterations. It was so comprehensive.
Wow. Well, that's a very big compliment. Thank you for that. It was, I'm happy it looked easy. It wasn't that easy. Definitely, I would say for me personally, you know, the language barrier was incredibly difficult. I do not speak Japanese. I had never even been to Japan before I started making this film. My very first experience in Japan was touring with the Pan Pacific Hula exhibition with these amazing kumu and their halau. And that was really kind of where I got my first introductions to teachers in Japan and students in Japan. But I had to have a really kick-ass associate producer and fixer, Hatsumi Asaka, who's also a hula sister of mine who works for NHK. And she really helped me, you know, not get lost in Japan, basically, and find the trains and find the planes and make sure that we got to where we needed to be. And, you know, even just, you know, how that affects the interview process. You know, I'm in an interview, but I ask a question, it's translated. The subject says something, I have no idea what they just said. And then it's sort of relayed back to me, but I'm not quite sure that that's exactly what they said. And so it was a very different process. I found that very challenging. I also feel like, you know, fundraising for this film was incredibly difficult. I'm very fortunate that, you know, this film took me, you know, about 10 years to make. And a lot of that was just in the challenges of trying to raise the money to make the film. Wrote tons of grants and, you know, definitely this one was a harder film to fundraise for because it's not like hula in Hawaii and everyone goes, oh yeah, I got it. It's like hula, but hula as this explosive, phenomenal, you know, popular venture in Japan. Everyone's like, what? Well, that's weird. You know, you have to really kind of step back and look at it. But I would say that it was also really exciting to go to Japan because I was so out of my element. It sort of forced me out of my comfort zone as a director and a producer. But sometimes I would not know what was happening. Like we would be shooting, like the Smile workshop, for instance, when we were shooting that, I was like, I don't know what's being said, but I know that this is really interesting. It's so fascinating, but I'm probably going to have to figure out what's actually happening in the edit room because there's no way that I can actually kind of, you know, get all the translations and kind of understand in this context. But there's something instinctual that I feel like, you know, I kind of knew. I was like, this is wildly fascinating. I could just watch this, even though I don't know what's happening. So it was really kind of a different film with different challenges.
Absolutely. No, that's fascinating. I'm curious, was there any, like, I mean, the film is really tight at 72 minutes, but obviously you've been working on this for so long. Were there any components that you like wish had made it in there? Or anything like was like really close that maybe we'll see in another iteration?
Yeah, you know, I just did the PBS cut down. So the film is airing on public television. The whole trilogy is airing in the Pacific Heartbeat series. It's airing tonight in Hawaii, and you know, everyone can check their local listings to find out when it's going to be screening. But there was one character who I absolutely loved that studied under Kumuseko Okamoto sensei. And she actually ended up, she was kind of, to me, like very representative of a lot of these women who in their older age or retirement age sort of were like, I'm going to do hula for me. I've been the wife, I've been, you know, the mother, I've spent my whole life doing things for other people, and now this is what I want to do. And she just was so into hula and would practice every day, and her grandchildren would watch her. And we spent a really lovely day at her home, and I loved all of this footage. But as the years went on, she ended up leaving the group and starting her own halau. And so, you know, the kumu in the film was like, I really don't want her in the film. And I was like, I understand, but I get it. So I did have to remove that. And that was one thing that I remember like kind of missing a little bit. But, you know, I think the director's cut really has just about everything, but trimmed down. So I didn't really have to lose big segments, but definitely had to kind of tighten as much as possible. I mean, we shot a lot of hula rehearsals. There were a couple of other groups too that I was hoping to maybe feature that we just didn't have time for. And the PBS version is like 56 minutes or something. So we really had to squeeze it even tighter. But you know, that's PBS, right? They like it short and sweet. So yeah, this was, we spent a long time cutting though. I will say it was probably like 2 years of on and off sort of with different cuts and getting feedback from consultants and subjects. So it's a long process, a long haul.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And honestly, I mean, shout out to you for consulting your subjects so much. There's so many documentarians that is not part of the practice. And that's really amazing to really get their voices and really feel heard.
Yeah, no, I personally think it's really important. And I'm not going to say it's easy, right? Sometimes there have been times in the past where I've shown rough cuts and they're like, I don't like the shirt I was wearing. I don't like my hair in here. Can we reshoot this whole thing? So it can open up cans of worms. But what I do like about that is that I want them to feel ownership of their own stories and feel like they have input and dialogue. And usually that dialogue is the most important part of that post-production process. And, you know, I think for the most part, for them to be able to witness like how much work goes into actually kind of finally nailing down the cut, probably by the end of it, they're like, I don't want to see any more rough cuts, Lisette. Just tell me where to show up. Where's the film going to premiere? I'll be there. Because it is such an involved process. But in general, it's made it, I think, even better when we actually do share it with the world because they feel like they were very much involved in the process.
Absolutely. No, that's incredible. And that's really amazing to hear. That kind of ties into this, one of the last questions I have, which is kind of focusing on the festival theme this year about raising communities. And the film block that's showing in is about raising artists. So what do you hope others, especially aspiring artists, really take away from your film?
Wow. I mean, you know, I think that there are probably like a lot of different art forms around the world that will see something like Tokyo Hula and be like, oh, wow, this is happening in my culture with, you know, this dance or this storytelling form. And I hope that it's just sort of a place where it can be a starting point for really interesting conversation and dialogue. One thing that I really wanted to do with this film was not to say this is right or this is wrong or It's like kind of treating it like a black and white issue. And I do think that some people have very like negative attitudes towards hula in Japan. And I really kind of wanted people to see, you know, this is something that is happening. It has been happening for a long time. And there's pros and cons, right? There's going to be some good and there's going to be some bad. But, you know, what do we want to do as a community? How do we want to participate in this conversation, this dialogue, so that it can be a very kind of constructive and creative one, so that in the future, that we're all sort of feeling good about, you know, hula as it goes global, instead of sort of, you know, talking stink behind, you know, the maybe online or, you know, on social media. There's a lot of chatter sometimes about things. I would like it to be out in the open, and for us to kind of, because it is a difficult conversation. And, you know, I think that for any artist from any culture, anywhere in the world, you know, this question of culture versus commodity, appreciation versus appropriation, you know, all of those questions are right there at the surface, you know, if you look hard enough. So I hope that it kind of challenges folks to think about, you know, who they are and what they want to be involved in when it comes to the perpetuation of a culture, and how can we do it so that we still feel proud of you know, our contributions and our interactions in that exchange.
Absolutely. And I mean, that you know, piece about culture versus commodity, I mean, this like explores that idea, I think, in one of the best ways that I've seen, of really allowing so many different people to have a voice and to own that, but, you know, whether to expose that gray area and not say, you know, not draw the line too much for the audience, but really allowing all these different voices to exist and to show that range, right? To where, you know, this could have been on a single line to say, you know, that this is either one or the other, or, you know, that this is actually, you know, that maybe, you know, you have to have certain, you know, teachers, you know, who grew up learning this, teaching this, or like, this is kind of where we're drawing this specific boundary. But here I feel like this just explores it in a really vast way, where everyone is making their own distinctions, and you really come away with so many more questions, and that's the sign of a great film.
Yeah, that's good. I like that, you know, more questions, more, you know, I'm going to go and look at this, or I'm going to research further, or try to find other things to, you know, think about. So yeah, hopefully it's, you know, thought-provoking.
So it definitely was for me. I mean, I watched it yesterday, and it's been on my mind ever since. And I've been fastidiously Googling a bunch of things. Speaking to that, if people either want to watch this film again or share it with other friends or audience members, what's the best way for them to find this, or, you know, any of your other work? You mentioned this is part of a trilogy. So if, you know, people saw this and they'd never seen any of your other work beforehand, where can they look at it?
Right. So the entire trilogy of Hula documentaries is airing this summer. The Hula trilogy on the Pacific Heartbeat series from Pacific Islanders and Communications. It's on PBS. You can check your local PBS listings, or you can go down here to my website, www.lehuafilms.com, and find out more about upcoming screenings for the festival version, like here at the Happy Fest, or the PBS version, which is the cut down on PBS. And yeah, this has sort of been a year of festivals online, and I hope you guys can find the other films and check them out. So thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you so much for joining us. And is there, do you have an Instagram handle or anything you want to plug if anyone wants to follow you as an artist?
Sure, at Ka'ualena, if you want to check out anything from my film work. It's also, I think that feeds directly into my website. So one way or another, you can follow myself for the film.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure talking with you. And I thank you again for sharing your film with us. It's so beautiful.
Thank you so much, Michael. Mahalo nui to the festival as well. Thank you.